Hello, everyone, and welcome to another weekly episode of a VNture podcast with your hosts, Taros and MR. This week, we bring to you our regularly scheduled content of our monthly Readports, where we each discuss what we've been reading the past month and our thoughts about it and how much we've enjoyed them and any new news we have to share. So, MR, why don't you take it away and tell us something that you've been reading and a little something more that you wanted to follow up on.
Yeah, hello. I need to bring us back to an episode about gameplay, because I mentioned that I have played Kamifuda. I have to be honest, the thing that lured me in is a weird blend and mix of story with gameplay, and specifically card games, because I haven't seen card games incorporated in VNs that much. Okay, but backing up. What is Kamifuda? It's a VN, English original VN, that is in a wizarding school. Takes an inspiration from Harry Potter and incorporates Arkham mythos, because it's all about pact bearers and pact lords with an eldritch entities. And it just so happened, as in all anime-esque stories, there is a extra-circular club for people to play card games. What is unique in their take is that those cards represent rituals, because, again, they borrow from Arkham, and Arkham is about very ritualistic in nature. The story about all those elder gods or unknown entities. And I felt like, damn, that is an interesting direction to take, especially since the intro to the title is very, shall I say, creepy and overwhelming. Because you start in a cell, you're very locked up on your last leg on a death's door. But then you have your jailer rescue you and give you the last chance. And for somehow, from one thing to another, you join a after-school club. It's weird, okay? It's weird.
Everything has to go back to a high school club.
Exactly. And the start was so intriguing when you have that feeling of isolation, of being lost in that dreadful place that seems to be like somewhat of a normal school, but then you have thorn vines growing everywhere in the school, and everybody say, "Don't touch them because you will have some hallucination." Like, what the hell is going on? And how is that normal? You can have.
Oh yeah, a whole lot of magic settings seems to have the most unsafe aspects to it that they just brush off, right?
Exactly.
Oh.
Like, what the hell? Shouldn't someone do something about it? Not change the hallway you walk through? Like, hello? But it builds the mystique. Okay, fine. And I have to give them credit, because they isolate you as a reader from the protagonist that you follow. That's something very unique, because it's very easy to have an empty vessel, a blank canvas protagonist. The self-insert, I don't like that term, but so I avoid it. But some people say self-insert, right? Mm-hmm. But here, you have a pre-established guy that has the memory of the past, and he knows why he landed in the cell, but you do not, as reader, right? Because he rarely shares that past. And that is very interesting, because it incentivizes you to befriend other characters in the club, because on rare occasions, when he shows weakness and shares some insight in the past, you get to know the protag as well as that character. Like, that's a good approach. That's a good approach to have a protagonist.
Exactly. Usually, any game that has those sorts of social links where you get to know other characters, it's entirely focused on the other character.
Yes.
because the main character usually doesn't have anything interesting going for him. But like you said, the main character is like fully fleshed out, and you have to piece together his own history as you talk to the other characters too. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. I love how that makes it like, it makes it a two-way street where you're learning about both people.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the best part of the title. And how can I say it? The direction they went with, like the slow incorporation of you into the club, and you're learning the rituals, spells. It was handled nicely because all the other classmates in that class were your teachers in a way, in different schools of rituals. So you bond over that, and obviously they got characterized. A shy girl was very aquatic, very water-based, and the fiery, passionate person was very, explosions everywhere, right? So they were characterized like that. And a mysterious leader of the club had a lot of blood rituals, something like that. You see where I'm going with that, okay?
Okay.
But ultimately, even though it set up all those intrigues and everybody involved in a club was, like I mentioned before, bound to some sort of entity they had to make pact with in order to get those supernatural powers, ultimately that wasn't used that well, and they tread very safe ground. Nothing, I don't want to say spicy, but nothing interesting came out of it other than the initial impression, like something is eerie here. Even the direction when they went with and conclusion they reached felt contracted in a lot of places. And again, I'm trying not to spoil anything, right? Okay, so I'm carefully navigating the space of what is acceptable to say, but ultimately I feel like the story was too easily predictable in a lot of places. I could very easily hedge my bets who will betray who, what will happen, and in what position you will land yourself in. Now, there were some twists along the way, especially in regards to Protac, which was probably the best part of this visual novel. Piecing together your own past, that's a unique aspect. By befriending others, you understand the Protac. Damn, I like that. That felt pretty cool. But the conclusion and the ultimate climax of the entire conflict, that was predictable. Ultimately, my biggest complaint about this title, if you've ever experienced an Arkham Light atmosphere or Arkham Light scenario, you know what's going to happen. You can predict a lot of here.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Now, that's not always a bad thing, like you mentioned. Just,
Rule.
some would even say that's a good thing because being familiar means that your story makes sense.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
But ultimately, for me, it tread too many safe grounds, and they didn't breach anything that was truly interesting, at least in my opinion.
Okay. And you've spoken before at length about the gameplay, right? How there's a card game aspect to it, but despite that, the story still puts a lot of emphasis on its characters. Usually you don't see that. So I'm happy to hear that they're doing well on both fronts.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in passing when I was discussing gameplay, how they conjure spells through cards, and how the gameplay evolves from chapter to chapter. And you need to keep up with them until you notice that their spells don't equal your spells, because you're worse at spellcasting than they are. And that's an interesting balance, I have to say, from the story gameplay perspective. When the gameplay evolves in such a way, you know the same spells, but just because they are more experienced than you with those spells/rituals, they do them better than you. And you need to be clever enough to counteract that idea. And that contributes to the fact that the Protac itself was portrayed as very witty and coy in his strategy on how to approach those duels, ritualistic duels. Now, on top of that, what I did not mention, and I explained in today's episode, is that those rituals tend to be aligned with character, right? So a passionate person was more of a fire spells, and a more calm person had water. But then comes those exams, right? Because they like to test each other on duels. And you face someone who you expect to be water. But she said, okay, I understand my weakness. I want to overcome it. And she, strangely enough, became very emotional in that moment. And she incorporated those spells of school she didn't master yet. And those created a very memorable moment. Yes, you had a feedback loop of how gameplay interacts with story and how story interacts with gameplay. Yes, she understood by successfully losing to a newbie that you are in a lot of rituals. Okay, something is wrong with my approach, being to spells, to character, and I'll need to get better. And maybe getting better is addressing my own weakness of shyness. Let's bring in some passion. And that influenced how she dueled you. Like, whoa, I like that.
Okay, you get that good old, story and gameplay integration together.
Exactly. Yeah.
I always love it when gameplay VNs do that, or much of anything, to be honest, even video games. Sometimes you play the gameplay, and then it goes to a cutscene, and it's like, what the heck did these have to do with each other? Like exactly. The perfect example is always in like those JRPGs, whether action or turn-based, where it's supposed to be a hopeless boss fight, but you're kicking their ass before, the scripted thing ends in 3 turns, and then it goes to a cutscene where the villain is gloating about how bad he was beating you, and you're like, what the hell? I was whooping your ass.
Exactly. In one of the gameplay episodes we recorded, you brought the definition of what a good gameplay looks like. And I just can't disagree with that. Like, you made a great example. If you have a gameplay disconnected from flow of story that you can't completely remove, that's a terrible gameplay in VN. And yeah, if you have a continuation, like you said, in RPG mode or something like that, you have a battle with a fierce opponent, a big bad boss, and you easily defeat it, then it goes to the castle, and you, with the last strength, I swing my sword and reach victory. Like, that's not what happened. That was it, right? Like, that's disconnect. And this game did not disappoint on that front. I really enjoy how they incorporate the gameplay and story aspect. And also, I need to bring one topic from the past, because probably now this is why I had the biggest problem with Ars Magna, because their gameplay was so skippable. Alchemist of Ars Magna had probably the weakest gameplay I've experienced from dual tail titles, because they didn't have that feedback loop. That's probably it.
Feedback loops are important. Gameplay loop.
Yeah.
Just thinking about what the player is going to be doing.
Yeah. And I think with that, I've looped out myself. So what did you bring, Taurus?
Okay, so Kami Fuda definitely sounds interesting. I love that you mentioned all its gameplay aspects, because there's another gameplay title I want to return to called, it's a mouthful, Master Detective Archives Raincode. I talked about this, I think a few months ago that I was playing, and I've finally wrapped it up, and I have a chance to talk about it now. To recap, this is the story of a main character who wakes up at a train station with amnesia. He has no idea what's going on, but apparently he is a detective, and he has been ordered to go to a part of the country called Kanai Ward to investigate mysteries there. He takes a train, and, well, a lot of stuff happens and whatnot, but eventually his ultimate mission is to uncover the secrets behind the city in Kanai Ward. To make matters more complicated, he also has an evil death god, Shinigami, that only he can see and hear, who helps him out along the investigations that he's apparently made a pact with. And this Shinigami also has the power to bring him and maybe others into a weird dimension of like the mystery world of some sort, where all of the mysteries coalesce into a physical representation. And so as he explores this labyrinth, it's a visualization of him trying to solve the mysteries in the world. It's all very crazy and zany.
I mean, I'm trying to picture that in my head. Like,
yes.
If I am a detective and I go to the scene of crime and I see a broken glass, then I go to the mystery world, and is the broken glass a big bad boss?
No, the big bad bosses are other individuals trying to hide the truth. Not them literally,
okay.
but big old monsters represented by them. In fact, that broken glass would be a solution key that he can use as part of his powers.
Okay. What? Wait.
To break down the physical manifestation of words and arguments. In case you can't tell by the screenshots going by the screen, this Raincode is very much a spiritual successor to Danganronpa. It has a lot of the same staff, like similar music and art style and the structure and all of that. And so, again, if you're familiar with Danganronpa, you can very easily see the comparisons between this and Raincode.
Although I have to say, when you mentioned the mystery world, my mind flew immediately into the Persona. How would you liken that to Persona? Because that's another big title that was all about mystery solving and having a parallel world exploration.
Yes, I see the comparisons. I'm not too much of a Persona fan, but, once again, you go in there and it's to investigate mysteries, and instead of a dungeon crawler, this takes place as more of a puzzle-solving thing. It's a little hard to define, kind of like how Danganronpa's class trials are where you're shooting down arguments with, like, real bullets, and in this case, you're cutting down opposition with, like, your solution blade.
What?
Yes, it's a little hard to define, but yes, keep in mind, there are still the mini-games that are very, very complex and flashy ways to answer yes, no, and present evidence. With all of that said, though, it's a good comparison to Danganronpa because overall, I can't help but think that Raincode had similar highs to the Danganronpa series, but they weren't as good, whereas they kept all of the problems and the low points of Danganronpa. So overall, it's really hard for me to say if I enjoyed this or not. It had good parts, but more often than not, it was kind of overshadowed by the negatives.
Yeah, I need to piece it together in my head, because you went with abstract concepts turned into tangible things. When was the last time I heard someone arguing and you literally shut down his arguments?
Exactly.
With a gun. Like, what? And funny enough, I have a title in mind that did the representation of discussion in physical form quite nicely. I'm not sure if you're aware of titles such as Yumina the Ethereal, but that was a title in which you attended a debate class. That was the obvious extracurricular high school class activity in which you were skilled in debate, but debate had a physical manifestation because you debated a tennis team and they went with their tennis rackets and they were hitting you with those, using arguments. That was so weird. That's the closest I know to the physical manifestation of discussion. Mystery solving?
Yeah, I know. It is very similar, but unfortunately, there are no high school after-school clubs to be found here. Now, he does, on that note, though, he does have other detective colleagues who all have something called a forte, which is some sort of, vaguely supernatural special ability that they have to help investigate these crime scenes. Like, for example, there's one who is extremely good at disguises. And he can even adjust, his body and his clothes pretty much on demand to completely be someone else.
Oh.
And so you meet your other, people who have their own fortes. And they are pretty cool, and they join up with the main character. And actually, that's one thing I think this VN does well, is that it really pushes the limits of how useful these abilities can be in a detective investigation. Because like I mentioned, there's the guy who's got all of the disguises. And of course, that lets you impersonate someone else and get into forbidden areas. But also an emphasis of that chapter is the social engineering side of things. Where depending on who you disguise yourself as, and if you talk to certain people, they may be much more willing or unwilling to talk about the case. And so it's one method of gathering information. And I don't really think other VNs really approach, the social deduction of that angle, you could say. So it was very cool.
Oh my god, that's true.
So
I mean, a lot of VNs like to portray the protagonist group as the good boys. So stooping to the level of social engineering to infiltrate an information is like, no, that's a bad thing to do.
No, not stooping to the level. I like that you mentioned the group aspect, though, because like I said, each of the chapters, I guess each of the cases, focuses on the main character and one of his detective colleagues. And this is kind of one of the bigger issues I have in Raincoat, is how disconnected a lot of everything feels. Like I mentioned, he's part of a group of detectives, and yet each chapter he focuses on one and him partnering with someone else. And again, it feels so cut off from everyone where it doesn't feel like a group. It's like when you play, a typical Mareeck, and you have the common route ends, and it branches into all the heroines, and then you go onto one heroine's route, and everyone else in the cast just goes poof.
Poof.
Exactly like that.
I'm gone.
So, I mean, I got that kind of feeling where it's like you partner up with one person, and it's like, where are all my other buddies? We get very little group interactions.
The way you describe those chapters reminds me of another title you've said in the past, 4-8 Shibuya Scramble. But that was the point of that title, to have different perspective.
Well, I mean, that was different perspective, but it was all the same events. And I mean, that was the main draw of 4-2As, that you get to see all the wild ways they interact. But in Raincoat, it's like, not really. It's you're investigating these cases and just kind of more or less doing it solo. On that note, I think there's technically 6 cases. There's a prologue case, like case 0, and then 1 through 5. A lot of the cases and the overall story feels very disconnected. And I think that was my biggest problem with Raincoat that caused me not to enjoy it as much, is that I really couldn't dig my teeth into it. I mentioned the main overall mystery is that the group is given orders to investigate the Kanai Ward's, I think, ultimate mystery surrounding the city. And they don't really have anything to go off with that. Because, I mean, that's a huge task. It's like if I told you, hey, investigate the mystery of your whole country. And it's like, there's a lot of ground I could cover. Yeah. So, like, for the first half of the game, they're just kind of milling about. They're kind of directionless. And the first few cases, Yuma, the main character, winds up getting involved in solving murder mystery cases that, I'm sitting there thinking, like, I don't think this has anything to do with anything. Like, this case just exists to have a case to solve and to showcase him, growing along the way, obviously, but it's very cut off and separate from everything. I mean, it's when you have something like Danganronpa, part of what made that series so great for me was that how interconnected all the cases were. You had your main cast of 16 characters, or however many, and then they get killed off throughout the way. But you would see characters interact with them, and you'd see characters react, and like, if someone was really broken up about a death in chapter 1, in chapter 2, he'd still be beating himself up, and he'd feel awful about it. And, even future cases would use locations from the past, like an old classroom or a chemistry lab that you found in chapter 2 would pop up again in chapter 4. So that absolutely does not happen here in Raincode. It's like you go to one location and it's all revolves around the clock tower in like chapter 1 or whatever, and then the rest of the game you pretty much never go there again. It's like never even brought up again. Even
I think like
oh yeah, and even the sorry, even the most important part is that even the cast members involved just never really get mentioned again. It's like the game has to keep throwing out like tens of new named characters for each case, and they're really just serving as, you know, blank standard culprits. One of the problems I had throughout many of these cases is that your list of culprits that who could have, you know, reasonably committed the crime is so small. It's like, okay, well, I've kind of narrowed it down to the guy who most likely did it just because there's no other freaking option.
Wow. Yeah, I wanted to chime in with my observation, listening to you on that title, is that it seems to struggle with the identity. Because the way you describe it, I would describe mysteries that aren't around one great mystery. Because you can have a detective story, and one example of that is, for those who read it, is Nonoiro Reincarnation. It's a mystery story in which you pretty much are the free agent, and you take jobs. And all those cases aren't interconnected by design. You just take those jobs, and you help on your small village all the problems. Now, underneath that, maybe, not spoiling anything, maybe those are connected. But this is not the main plot. This is not the main thread. And now you say that this title tried to hook you in with one grand mystery. You go solve this world. Go. And then every small case you come across don't feel connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I love that you took the time to explain the Nairo reincarnation when Ace Attorney, as an example, was sitting right there.
Bro, that's the second title I had in mind.
Exactly. Ace Attorney, you know going in that all of your cases are going to be different. And I was about to say the VN knows that too, but some people have strong opinions on that.
Yeah.
the game knows that too. And so they establish a crowd entirely just for the one case, but it's well-rounded and there's a plot line in the background.
Yeah.
With like the first half of Raincode, I didn't really get that premise. There's even, I guess, it's the first 2/3 of it. There's a lot of these cases where they just are throwing a ton of you at once, and pretty quickly I learn, okay, well, I shouldn't bother getting attached to any of this because it's not going to matter as soon as the next chapter starts. And it's very disappointing. Which is silly because, like, cases, well, I guess chapters 4 and 5, the last two, they really, focused entirely on the big overarching mystery. And they dropped some big, plot twists and mysteries, and it had a great ending and climax. I loved what they were doing there, and I was wondering, they really could have spread these out more. They didn't have to back-end it all into the last chapter. The last chapter, I think it's fine to say, the last chapter isn't even a murder mystery case.
Uh-huh.
It's just, solving all the mysteries behind the big overarching Kanai Ward, city happenings. And so it's very funny that, you have all of this stuff going on, and it's this is all the big overarching meta content, and it's all flooding this last chapter instead of spreading it out. That's what I think anyways. So, all in all, this was fun, but I really wish a lot of it was connected more. I really wish a lot of things. The cast was connected more, the cases were connected more, the overarching plot connected more, the, character development connected more.
I see. Because you know what? Now that I, in retrospective, think about all my examples, in this year, the title that did well, the idea of big one mystery, divided into smaller mysteries connected to each other, is Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Mm-hmm.
They did it very well. You had a big case that was divided into chunks, chapterized, and each of them connected to each other. And in the grand climax at the end, now it tests your knowledge of how you solved all of them and what's the final conclusion you reached. Yeah, he did it really well, I have to say.
So all in all, Raincoat does have some good things going on for it. I've heard a lot of people love it, and I heard a lot of Danganronpa fans, obviously, have that itch to get more of the same. Personally, though, I often had to challenge myself to keep going. Not because I didn't like it or anything, but just because I'm like, is something gonna grip me, Chapter 2 did. Case 2 was great.
Oh, okay. I see. But in your estimate, then, since more or less you felt that this title is beloved by the community, right? What made it beloved by those who are very fond of Danganronpa, for example? Was it the fact that the cases itself were interesting?
Some of them, like I said, 2 was great, 4 was great, 5 was more of the conclusion of the game rather than its own case. Obviously, as you can tell looking at the backgrounds, it's got great character designs. Danganronpa, is obviously known for that, and they keep it going here. Like I said, there's so many freaking characters, and generally they're all pretty good too. I really wish they had more depth, and I wish there was more to them, but visually, they nail it. There's also some hilarious twists at the end, both in a good way and both in a oh my god, I can't believe that happened sort of way. There's I wish I could say it, but oh man. Okay. There's some great twists involved.
I understand. No spoiling.
Also, like I mentioned, this is as you can tell from the screenshots, this is a 3D animated game instead of Danganronpa, which was very much 2D. That was kind of the style it went for, and it pulled it off very well. Raincoat is 3D, and overall, they did some neat stuff in the mystery labyrinth, utilizing how wacky and creative everything could be. Going back to Case 2, Case 2 was fantastic in how they utilized three-dimensional space to illustrate how they were solving the mystery, and how they put together the clues and how things click together, and how it illustrated, I guess you could say the whole flow of the crime and all of that. I thought that was a fantastic visualization, and if anything, Case 2 made it entirely worthwhile to go in the whole, Unreal Engine.
Oh, interesting.
All in all, I think I would have to give Raincoat like a 6 out of 10.
Oh.
And to be fair, just so everyone knows, I use the whole scale. I use the whole scale from like 1 to 10. So 6 out of 10, that's on the upper half, okay? That's
okay.
That's overall, I'm happy I played it. I think there was a lot holding it back, but overall, I'd have to say I enjoyed it. And if you're a Danganronpa fan, or if you really have got that itch for a really zany murder mystery kind of thing, yeah, I'd recommend it.
So ultimately, you recognize it had a bit too many flaws for your liking, but overall, it was a positive experience.
Yeah, I'd have to say overall it's positive. I'm happy I spent those hours playing it, I guess.
Okay. Speaking of hours spent, because I'm not that far in, let me migrate to the topic of Amatsutsumi, because this is the title I'm reading right now. And I am around chapter 16, for those who read it. I haven't reached any ending nor any route yet. And it's another title from Purplesoft I'm reading. And I feel like they are known from wild ideas. They are known from Happy Maya and Chrono Clock. Both of them had a topic, Chrono Clock, with a very short time jumps in the past, when protagonists had a power of time rewinding for 5 minutes, and Happy Maya was about lucid dreaming. And I feel like those topics don't really gel with people that well, and I feel with Amatsutsumi they finally struck gold.
Yeah.
Because their setup is, and I'm going to borrow that term from VNture books, is that the protagonist that you're following is a form of a godling. And the way, and I'm using that very carefully, not to spoil too much.
Yeah, can you
too
please
much.
explain? I'm not familiar.
It's a sort of a smaller deity that has some supernatural powers.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's a person who can create commands using emotions. And because that's a dangerous power, the way he was brought up in the secluded village in the mountain is to suppress emotions. But some sort of call to adventure that was ever present with him made him leave the village. And this is where the title starts. When he passed out on the street, meets the first person that brings him in. And the setup for this title is super intriguing, because now you have a guy completely unable to express emotions, tries to experience what it is to live normally. One way or another, he worms himself inside a house because he can give commands and he can become a permanent resident there without much issue. It's such a... Again, I'm trying not to spoil, and I am quite early in from this title. Every time I read it, it's like an eerie experience of how it is that this protagonist represents an extreme shy person on an extreme introvert to such a degree that they don't understand emotions of others. And the funny bit, the gag that they made of it, is that a lot of people like to tease each other in school. Like, oh, you like that guy, ho, 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 smiles, etc. He interprets that as they are very mean to each other and they keep bullying each other. Like, and yet, if you think about it, if you're so detached from emotions that you only speak facts, only observations, a lot of behavior is incomprehensible to you.
Like very much
mm-hmm.
a view of emotions and I guess social interactions.
Yes.
From the viewpoint of someone who's very stunted in that area.
Yeah, exactly. And funny enough, he tries to open up, and it isn't always as he intends to do, because the moment he pours emotions, he issues commands. And that is very troublesome, because he didn't intend to be so intrusive, but his emotions are run some rampant, and they become irresistible commands to others. That's super intriguing setup. So that's why this title gripped me so far immediately. Whereas when it comes to Chrono Clock and Happy Maya, it took some time for the hook to sink in. But this one, immediately. I'm in.
Ah, nice. Then we'll have to hear more later about how much you're liking it. Hopefully it keeps up that train.
Yeah, I hope so too.
All right, then I guess we'll have to call things now. On that note.
Yeah. Thank you very much for listening, for everybody. And I hope we made you interested in some of the titles spoke today.
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for listening again. I hope, as Amar said, that you enjoyed some of the titles that we talked about. Maybe you'll check it out, maybe you won't. But either way, please make sure to tune in next week for more VNture podcasts. Thank you, everyone. VNture out.
VNture out.